Hey guys, I'm Leah,
And I'm Ivana.
and we are going to show you today a presentation about the fall of the Berlin Wall. At first, I'm going to tell you about the partitioning of Berlin. World War II ended in 1945, and it split Germany into four parts: the East, ruled by the Soviet, and the West, divided in the sector from America, British, and France. Berlin was about 100 miles apart from the east and west border on the east side, but it was still divided in East and West Berlin. The East, ruled by the Soviet, also called GDR, German Democratic Republic, and the West, ruled by their allies. Blockade and crisis. The Soviet wanted to have the Allies out of Berlin, but the Allies didn't want to go out. So first they tried it for good, but then they aimed to starve the Allies out. But the Allies supplied their sector from air for more than a year, night and day. They bought them about 2.3 tons of goods. People started to flee from the GDR. More than 3 million people were successful. On August 12, 1961, 2,400 people fled on one day. After that, the Soviets decided to build a wall. It needed about 2 weeks. It was built by army, police, and volunteers. Before the wall was built, the people were able to move from one side to the other side freely. For example, for work, shopping, entertainment. There were even trains and subways, but after that it was impossible, except for one of the 3 checkpoints, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. But eventually they built 12 checkpoints. Even though they had the checkpoints, it was really hard to come to the other side because they only let people through with special circumstances, and travelers were rarely allowed. 1961 to 1989. The wall stopped the flood of people and diffused the crisis of Berlin. Even though the American president was not really happy about the wall, but he thought that it was still a better idea than another wall. The wall was 12 feet tall and about 4 feet wide, which made climbing over it pretty much impossible. On the east side there was a death strip, which was out of soft sand to show the footprints, floodlights, vicious dogs, tripwire machine guns, and soldiers who were supposed to shoot everybody who tried to go over the wall. At least 171 people or more were killed by trying to go over the wall. But also, more than 5,000 people were successful. I mean, how were they successful? They either jumped out of windows, or they climbed over barbed wire, or they built a hot air balloon and flied over the wall. Some people crawled through the sewers and driving through unfortified parts of the wall at high speeds, or they have tunnels. The fall of the wall. On November 9, 1989, as the Cold War began to thaw across Eastern Europe, the spokesman for East Berlin Communist Party announced a change in his city's relations to the West. He said that starting at midnight, they were allowed to cross the border for free. East Berliners were happy and couldn't believe it at first, so they flocked to the wall, drinking beer and champagne, and at midnight they flooded through checkpoints. Over 2 million people visited West Berlin that weekend to participate in celebration in which is called the greatest street party in the history of the world. Hammers and picks were coming to knock away chunks of the wall, which is also known as the Mauerspechte or wall woodpickers. The wall was gone really soon and Berlin was reunited. Although it still needed almost a whole year until October 3, 1990, until Germany was officially reunited.
Now I'm going to talk to you about the Marshall Plan. It was named the Marshall Plan in honor of the U.S. Secretary of State at the time, George C. Marshall. In a rare move, Allies decided to help rebuild Europe with this strategy, which included aid in forms of money, supplies, and machinery. It was done with the intent to end hunger, poverty, operation, and chaos throughout Europe. And it was offered to every country in Europe and even the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union turned it down because they had a fear that they were going to promote capitalism if they accepted. The plan was successful because it gave over $13 million in loans and grants, and it even earned Marshall the Nobel Peace Prize. U.S. involvement. If failure to keep Berlin's economy rather stable ensued, then world leaders feared that one false move would trigger a nuclear war. This is why U.S. involvement in Berlin was important. If we failed, then Europe would fail, because Berlin was considered the middle and the heart of Europe at the time. At least that's how we thought of it. The Berlin crisis started with the Soviet blockade ordered by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, which led to the Berlin airlift, as Leah mentioned before. There are rumors spread that a wall would be built for further attempts to keep East Berliners out of West Berlin, but Khrushchev denied such allegations at the time. 10 years later, the Soviets delivered what was called the Berlin Ultimatum, which stated that the Allies needed to get out of Berlin within 6 months. And it also left the threat of a peace treaty between the Soviet Union and East Germany in the air. There was a meeting in Vienna between President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev, but they failed to come to an agreement, and they also failed to end the impasse, which is what this political cartoon here is showing at the time. Construction of the wall. Shortly after the failed meeting, it only increased the flow of refugees. When the wall finally did go up, thousands of angry protesters gathered on the West Berlin side, but were driven back by guards who had bayonets. Though this outraged much of the international communities, with London even calling the wall illegal for being contrary to the four-power status of Berlin, the Allied response was rather moderate, because the wall in no way interfered with the three essentials of the American policies, which included presence of Allied troops, free access to Berlin, and the West Berliners' right of self-determination. Presidential speeches. On June 26, 1963, President Kennedy gave his famous speech in Rudolph Waldt Square in Berlin. He talked about how no one really understood the great issue between the communist and free world. Siding with the reunification for all Berlin families, he stated the controversial sentence, "Ich bin ein Berliner." 24 years later, on June 12, 1987, President Ronald Reagan delivered his famous speech at the Brandenburg Gate, addressed to Mikhail Gorbachev. The speech was meant for West Berliners, but it was still audible to the East Berliners on the other side of the wall. He ended his speech with the famous, "Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And so he did 3 years later on June 13, 1990. Today, Berlin is a very modern city-state with shadows of its past still present. The Mitte district, or the heart of the city, was rebuilt. The Reichstag building, or the Parliament building, had its dome rebuilt into a modern glass dome after it was burned down during the Nazi regime. And they even have Checkpoint Charlie Museum, which was created to memorialize the entrance into the American sector. The people of Berlin are now a very wholesome and together people. And here I'm going to show you the quick summary, but we won't get to that. We'll come back to that later, so it's okay. And here is also our bibliography for our presentation. And now we're going to show you a little clip from 1989 of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Good afternoon. The Berlin Wall is being torn down as we speak. For those of you who don't know, the Berlin Wall was set up on August 12, 1961, after the Russian sector decided to stop East Berliners from heading into West Berlin to the American, British, and French sectors. Because of the better financial opportunities, most East Berliners would commute to West Berlin, but receive their schooling for free in East Berlin. We have Leah Hazob right now live at the Berlin Wall. Leah, please tell us what you're experiencing right now.
Hey Ivana, do you see what's going on behind me? It's the greatest street party Berlin has ever seen. It is unbelievable what just happened. I can't even. The people just ran over the wall, and it's just so unbelievable. I have someone here with me right now. Please tell us how you're feeling right now.
It's just so amazing over here to witness this. So many different colors. We don't have this in East Germany. Being here is just like being in a whole new world.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. We take so much for granted. And you, ma'am, what's this liberation been like for you?
I can't even describe it. Can you imagine how it felt to be stuck in there? Our food wasn't as good. Our homes weren't as good. We couldn't even talk to our family in West Germany.
Okay, thank you very much. And you, ma'am, how did you experience this whole thing? Did you notice something beforehand, or was it all surprising?
Days before the 9th of 11, I noticed that there was something going on. The demonstrations in Leipzig and East Berlin. But when I heard it in the radio, I couldn't believe it. I switched on the TV at home and watched what was happening in Berlin. It was so surreal. I watched all news channels I had access to. Unbelievable. On the other hand, there was something that feared that the Soviet Union or Volk's army would take action. Looking back on that time now, I must say that I never thought all would happen so quickly and peacefully.
Thank you for your input on the subject. As you have just heard, conditions in East Berlin were less than favorable. In East Germany, the only color shown was the communist red. There was no spontaneity and every move was controlled. Any important East German who had contact with West Germans were noted and frowned upon for having West contact. As far as education was concerned, the Soviet sector worked hard in raising Untertanen children, or children who are subservient to the Socialist Party. With such close-mindedness being enforced, exotic fruits, just as bananas and oranges, were almost seen as delicacies in what the East Germans called perhaps bags. Taken from the Soviet translation, it was called a perhaps bag, because perhaps you would get a banana, perhaps you would get an orange, perhaps you would get chocolate. Here, we have a photo of a woman shopping in one of the West German grocery stores. Having always been a socialist sector, such capitalistic ideas like this cow advertising chocolate are sure to baffle East Germans as they slowly integrate with the rest of the country. Reunification is sure to be a challenge. The Wessis and Ossis, though ecstatic about the reunification or Wiedervereinigung, have lived very different lifestyles until now. There is sure to be some friction and misunderstanding until they get the hang of things. I'm Leah Haslup reporting to you, live in Berlin, Germany. Back to you, Ivana.
Thank you, Leah. Well, there you have it, folks. This is an amazing event that is important not only in Germany's history, but in the history of the world as well. This could very well be the beginning of the end for the GDR, with the wall not being able to control the country anymore. I'm sure the German people will celebrate this day for years to come, as proudly as they are tonight. Rain, rain, and you guessed it, more rain. We have Cho Chang talking all about Seattle's rainy forecast for this upcoming week. More about this after that break.
We are the people.